right, good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. Tonight, as part of the Central Wisconsin Book Festival, we have Annelise Ryan is the USA Today best-selling author of the popular Mattie Winston Mystery series and a pseudonym for Beth Amos, who also writes the Mack mystery series under the pseudonym Allyson K. Abbott. Beth is a real-life emergency room RN living in Wisconsin. She believes laughter is the best medicine, and with the Mattie Winston series, she's hoping to medicate the masses. And before the performance, we'd like to thank our supporters for the Central Wisconsin Book Festival. Support for the 2022 Central Wisconsin Book Festival was provided through the Marathon County Public Library, Portage County Public Library, the McMillan Memorial Library, the Community Arts Grant Program of the Community Foundation of North Central Wisconsin with funds provided by the Wisconsin Arts Board, the Community Foundation, and the B.A. and Esther Greenheck Foundation. Support also provided in part by the Reuter Ware Law Firm, the Dudley Foundation, the Marathon County Public Library Foundation, the Portage County Public Library Foundation, the Covantage Cares Foundation, Whitewater Music Hall, the Marathon County Historical Society, Bound to Happen Books, and Yankee Bookstore. And again, thank you for coming out, and please give a warm welcome to Beth Amos.
I was told I have to wear that. All right, well, thank you guys for coming out. Believe it or not, this is not the worst turnout that I've ever had. I did a book signing once where absolutely nobody came, so actually I've done more than one of those. The world of writing books is an interesting one. It's one that requires a fair amount of ego, I guess, for some, but it also requires a lot of perseverance because it's not, well, for some, I suppose there's a trajectory where they write a book and there's instant fame and money and wealth and everything's fine after that. My journey hasn't gone quite that way. As you may have guessed from all the names that Colin gave you for the books that I've written, and I'll get into explaining all that, but for me, the writing career has been a bit of a Sisyphean task, which is why I chose this slide for the first one. And I'm just going to kind of give you a very brief overview of my childhood because it's really important to understand how I became a writer. And you'll understand once I get to the end of it. So when you start to go, oh, I can't believe she's doing this, bear with me because it'll pay off in the end. Let's see if I hit the right button here. All right, I think I did. All right. Like all good stories, this one starts with, it was a dark and stormy night. Any of you that know the, what is the name of the, Yeah, but what's the name of the prize? Oh, Colin probably knows. The Bull Whitten Litter Prize. There's a contest that they have, I think maybe every year now, where people can turn in their worst, best first line for a book. And it's kind of a takeoff on the It Was a Dark and Stormy Night, which has become sort of a cliched opening to mystery books. So that's kind of a joke. That's actually me in the picture, my baby picture. And that was the last time I was cute, as you'll see shortly. I was born in New York City and lived there until I was 2 years old. And then my parents got moved to upstate New York. And my father worked for the government. And every time he got a promotion, it meant a move to a new place. So in upstate New York, we lived in Ithaca, Eaton, Sodus Point, Morrisville, Elmira Heights. Every year it was a new school once I started school. So I was always the new kid in school, and that's kind of an awkward thing to have to do, especially when you look like this. It was a little bit of a struggle for me to fit in. My mother just loved these pink rhinestone cat-eye glasses, and she also loved Tony home perms. And I loved cutting my own hair, and this picture is a combination of all those things because my mother gave me a perm that I hated. I tried to cut most of it out, and then I had the glasses. I'm not even going to get into the whole gap between the teeth thing. And this was the result, and you can't really see it very well unless you get up close to the original picture, but the photographer, which they could get away with back then with black and white pictures, actually had to pencil in my hair on both sides to make it look even because my hair was like down to here on one side and was up here on the other side. The other things that made it difficult for me, in addition to looking like this and being the new kid in school, was that I was also a very big kid. When I was 11 years old, I hit 5'11". So I'm always a very tall, very big, gangly kid. That didn't make me popular with other kids. It was easy to poke fun at me. However, I was not bullied. At least being the biggest kid in the class means you don't get bullied because I not only did the other kids fear that I might beat them up, I did on occasion. So anyway, since I wasn't going to get by on my good looks, I was a pretty smart child, so I tried to go the teacher's pet route, thinking maybe that would help me win friends and influence people. And of course, you know how much other kids loved the teacher's pet, so that didn't go over too well. However, I have great report cards from grade school. I have all A's, a couple of B's, and I failed conduct and posture, but other than that, I was doing pretty good. I also alienated many of my fellow students because every time we'd get assigned a writing assignment of any sort, I was like, yes! And nobody else liked those. So since the teacher's pet thing wasn't working, I decided, let's be the class clown because that always gets laughs. One more move and it's a new school and they don't know me, so I'll just act out, be the class clown. So my report cards from those years have lots of notes from the teachers about how I talked too much, didn't use my free time well, finished my assignments fast, and had lots of free time that I did not use wisely. In the 4th grade, I had a teacher who was very intelligent. She actually taught me how to knit. And when I was done with my work, instead of disturbing all my fellow classmates, I could open my desk and take out my yarn and my knitting needles. And I knitted, oh my gosh, I knitted caps and slippers and mittens. I knitted everything in that year in 4th grade until I got transferred out of that class into Mrs. Rizzu's class. I made Mrs. Rizzu retire. So then, after getting through grade school and most middle school, when I was 12, my father got promoted to a job that moved us out to Washington State. So we moved all the way across the country. And I thought, well, this is great. This is a whole new start. Nobody out there knows me. I'm not even close to the people who know me. So the best way to make friends and influence people is tell lies. So I started telling lies about my life. Made myself sound much more interesting than I really was, and that's how I made friends and influenced people. I had enough practice trying to fit in with all these different school crowds growing up that by the time I moved out to, it was Pullman was the name of the town in Washington, for high school, I could fit in with any group I wanted. I could go out to the parking lot with the smokers and the guys hanging on their cars and fit in just as well with them as I could with the computer nerds in the computer lab, or the football jocks that were out in the fields, the cheerleaders, it didn't matter. I could fit into any group I wanted to, and I wasn't really very well known by any of them, but I could make do. And again, I just made myself sound better than I really was. We lived out in the country. We were very isolated, so I didn't have a lot of time to, intermingle with these other kids. And the kids that I knew best were the ones who rode my school bus, and I didn't see them except for when I was on the school bus. We didn't play together because we lived miles apart. And in those days, it was hard for my mother to take us anywhere, actually. Our home life was a little difficult during those years, too, so I really was fine with not having other kids know too much about my life. My dad became a pretty serious alcoholic. My mother's always had some mental health issues. We were talking today, my husband and I were talking today on the drive up here. We were listening to the song, Can't Live With You, Can't Live Without You, or something like that. And that's kind of the marriage that my parents had. It's like they could not get along, they fought all the time. It was a very acrimonious relationship, and yet they absolutely loved one another, and neither one of them could have ever survived without the other. It was just a messed up relationship. So me and my 3 sisters, we did the best that we could, and I did manage to go through all 4 years of high school, 9th through 12th, in one school, in one place, so that was like a new concept for me. And by the time I graduated, I actually had, friends and felt like I fit in a little bit. But because of my home life, I was pretty eager to get away, so I went to college in town, but I lived up on the campus. So there's Washington State University is in Pullman, Washington, so I managed to save enough money. I was able to buy myself a year of living on campus, and at the end of that year, rather than go home, I decided to get married. So at the end of that year, yes, I got married, and it was a big wedding with all the bling, the attendance, the gown. It was a church wedding. I was raised Episcopalian, so we got married in the Episcopalian church, and everything was just all big and fancy and very uncomfortable. And then 9 months later, I got a divorce. However, this very brief marriage will prove to be important later on, as you will see shortly. All right. So after that divorce, I think I waited 2 years, maybe not quite 2, and I got married again. This time it lasted about 7 years, and it produced a son whom I adore and love very much. During that time, I also went to nursing school. I moved to California because that's where my then husband was from. The marriage lasted 7 years, but about 4 years into it, shortly after my son was born, we actually ended up separating. So I ended up being a single parent for a lot of years, and we ended up divorcing. This is my son. I get to tell you, being a single parent for a son when you've grown up with 3 sisters, no brothers, and then you have to try to figure out things like football equipment and cups. What's a cup? I didn't know what a cup was. A lot of those little things that you don't think about, and as a single parent, all of a sudden it's like, I don't know how to do this. And his father was kind of in the picture, not in the picture, there sometimes, not other times, so it was a little bit awkward, but we struggled through it, and I got through my nursing school, and it was about that time that I started writing short fiction. I was writing stories that I was sending into women's magazines, mostly romantic fiction, because at that stage in your life, after already having one marriage that's failed, the second one's not looking too good, I started sending out these short stories to all these women's magazines and thinking, maybe I could make a little extra money on the side that way. I also moved from California to New Jersey. The reason for that was because my dad got another promotion. They got moved to New Jersey during the time I was in California, and when my husband and I were kind of separated, I ended up moving back to New Jersey to be closer to my parents, which may or may not have been a good decision. But anyway, I did that. And then after, I don't know, it was 7 years, moved to Virginia, got another divorce. So family was helping a little bit with childcare, and the other reason I moved to Virginia was because the cost of living there was a lot cheaper than it was in New Jersey, and as a single parent, I was trying to survive. I kept writing lots of short stories. Again, mostly romance, but I started branching out, and I started writing mysteries and thrillers. I wrote some horror stories. I was all over the map. I just wanted to write. I wanted to get my feelings out, just put those words on paper. And along with all those stories and that total lack of consistency, there was one consistency, and that was that they were all rejected. I literally have boxes of rejection letters. I have well over 100 of them at home that I determined I'm going to keep for the rest of my life because. Anyway, so because I was so good at it the first 2 times, I decided to get married again. And inevitably, number 3 also led to divorce. So apparently I'm better at writing than I am at marriage. My nursing career, however, took off pretty well at this time, and I started doing, actually moved into management positions. And while I was doing both nursing and management positions, I slowly discovered just what a great sense of humor people that work in the medical field have. It's a little dark, it's a little twisted, The lay people don't always appreciate it, but I loved it. And I've always had a dark sense of humor. My father had a very dark sense of humor, and so I did my best to jot down notes every time I heard a good, bon mot from somebody or a joke that somebody would say. I'd tell them, I'm going to steal that and I'm going to use it someday in a story. And I have used a bunch of them in stories. So my sense of humor really began to twist during that time. And while I was living in Virginia and doing this management stuff, this is where that first marriage now circles back and becomes important, because I told you we had all the bling and the gowns and the church and all the attendants and everything. Well, one of those attendants was the best man. And it turns out that's a very accurate term. He genuinely was the best man. And we hooked up. And we have now been together for 35 years. I did not marry him, though. We've been together for 35 years. I'm determined not to mess it up by getting married again. So that's been something that's been a bit of a stability in my life, which I think I definitely needed. While I was doing this management stuff, my bosses that I was working with wanted me to go back to school and get my bachelor's degree in healthcare management, and then also move on to getting a master's degree in healthcare management. It was the obvious assumption of what I would do in that career. I had a bunch of electives that I could take while I was going back to get my bachelor's, and I used every one of them, well, every one except for an unfortunate piano course, every one of them for an elective in writing. So I took journalism and technical writing and nonfiction writing. I wrote screenplays. I did creative writing, short fiction, long fiction. I was just desperate to learn anything I could about writing. And one of the classes that I took, the fellow who taught it was a grad student who had just had his first novel published. And after the class was done, I actually hired him to critique my novel writing for me, because I felt like I was writing, I was trying to improve my skills, I was reading books, I was taking classes, but I just felt like I wasn't quite grasping it yet, and I needed that one extra step. So for, several months, he and I met at a coffee shop once a week, and I would give him a chapter of this novel I was working on, and he would take it home and he'd red pencil it, and then we'd meet again the next week and he'd give it back to me and we'd discuss it, and he'd tell me what was good and what wasn't good, and then I'd give him the next chapter, and that went on until we finished the novel. And I felt like I got so much help from that. And so I decided to go ahead and submit that novel. Started trying to find an agent, because that's usually the first step for novel type works, is to find an agent, not a publisher. So I started submitting to agents. I submitted that book to quite a few agents and got 50 rejections. After 50 rejections, I said, maybe this book isn't it. By the way, that was another romance novel. So I threw it into the bottom of the closet, which I kind of felt like that's where romance belonged sometimes. And then I had to make the decision about moving on to the master's degree in healthcare management. And I also discovered that I really wasn't really fond of management in nursing. I kind of missed bedside nursing, and I didn't like all the politics involved with management stuff. So I made the decision to not pursue the master's program. My bosses were all absolutely horrified. I thought they were going to fire me. They were so disappointed in me. And I made myself a pact, and I said, if I don't succeed with this writing stuff by the time I'm 40, I'm just going to give it up, because clearly it just wasn't meant to be. And I think at this time I was in my late 30s, 37, 38. So if I'm not published by the time I'm 40, that's it, I'm done. Well, at the age of 39, I managed to sell an article to a hospice magazine. I was a hospice nurse, a hospice director, program director at the time. And I sold my first published piece, and I was paid by 5 copies of the magazine. No money. But I was published, so I had met my goal. That happened before I was 40. So then, at the time, I was reading mostly horror, supernatural kind of stuff, like Dean Koontz and some Stephen King and things like that. And I particularly enjoyed Dean Koontz. And I decided to go ahead and start another novel, and I wrote a supernatural thriller type of novel that I thought was kind of in the same vein as Dean Koontz. And once I had it done, I started submitting that out to more agents. So adding on to my 50 rejections from the first novel, I got another 39, including one charming fellow who wrote, "Don't quit your day job," on my query letter. This was back in the days of snail mail, you know, and it wasn't email. You actually had to put your letter in an envelope and look up the address and stick a stamp on it and mail it and then wait for the answer. And this gentleman returned my initial query letter in the envelope that I had to enclose, a self-addressed stamped envelope, with the handwritten note in the corner, "Don't quit your day job." So that doesn't really help your ego a whole lot, you know. It's like, maybe I'm really not cut out for this. But one Sunday afternoon, I'm at home and I'm vacuuming and I've got the stereo playing really loud and I'm belting out music and I hear the phone ring and I go over and figure it's family, friends, whatever, and I'm like, "Hello, what do you want?" Turned out it was an agent calling me. And I thought, agent on a Sunday? Maybe this is a hoax. I actually accused her of trying to trick me. Thank goodness she was actually a very kind woman. And she talked to me about the book, and then after a while, she said, "You know, let's work together. I really like this book. Make a few changes, and I'm going to go ahead and submit it." So I'm thinking, "Hey, I finally found an agent. I'm on track here." I knew that wasn't the end of it. She had to submit that, you know, to publishers, and we still had a ways to go, but I felt like I was making progress. So then after I made the changes and gave it back to her, she goes, "All right, I'm going to submit this book." And she calls me within a week, I think it was, and she says, "So we have HarperCollins interested, and they're willing to offer you X dollars amount." And when she said that, I was just so shocked to hear HarperCollins interested and a dollar amount that at first I thought she was saying I had to pay them that much money. And I was calculating in my brain, can I do that? Can I do that? And then she said, "However, there's also interest from Warner, and now we have a bidding war going." And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is it. My career is made, a bidding war. Well, the initial bid from HarperCollins was for $5,000. And then Warner came back with $7,500. And then Harper came back with $10,000. And I'm going, come on, guys, get up to the big numbers, you know. That's where it stopped. So this was in 1995. And that book, which was called Cold White Fury, came out in 1996. And my proudest moment when that book came out was that someone compared it to Dean Koontz. And they used that quote on, I think it was on the back cover. And HarperCollins went ahead and signed me up for 2 books. It was a 2-book contract. So Eyes of Night was my second book with them. And both of those books did really well. They had good sales. Cold White Fury even went into a second printing. So I thought, well, this is how it starts. We get off slowly, but you know, we're moving along and things are going to get better. And after I had turned in my second book, they negotiated with my agent and contracted for a 3rd book. And the 3rd book was called Second Sight. And on that one, you notice my name was in bigger print on the bottom. That's always a good sign that your name's in bigger print. And I think this is it. You know, we're moving along. Everything's going. All 3 of these books were what they call mass market paperbacks. So the little, you know, store carts, you know, or store rack paperback size. And right before Second Sight was due to come out, which was in fall of 1998, in the spring of 1998, HarperCollins decided, for whatever reason, that they were going to get rid of their paperback division, their mass market paperback division, and all the authors that were being produced in that, originally in paperbacks, were either going to be promoted to hardcover or they were going to be dropped. Well, guess who got dropped? So they actually, our editor that we were working with made us a verbal offer for a 4th book, but then that verbal offer was not followed up with an actual contract. So my agent and I were kind of left hanging, and since this all happened before my book came out, they didn't do anything to promote it because they knew that I wasn't going to be their author anymore. And so the sales on this book tanked. It didn't do very well at all, and so as a result of that, HarperCollins, of course, then gave me the boot. So now I had no publisher anymore. So my agent and I put our heads together, and she said, well, you know, that's okay. We just got to write another book. And now I had managed to sell Cold White Fury after writing the whole book, but I was able to sell the other 2 books based on just a synopsis, so a few pages of what the story was going to be about. And they paid me for that, and then just trusted that I was going to write the book. That was pretty nice. I liked that idea. So my agent then informed me that we weren't going to be able to sell a book that way to a new publisher. I was going to have to write the whole book again, which took me the better part of a year to write a book. So I set about trying to work on that, and there was another book idea that I had had in the back of my head for quite some time. Excuse me. Quite some time that was more of a mystery book, a humorous mystery that was going to utilize the humor that I had been experiencing all my life in the medical field. I wanted something that would just share that really twisted, dark, sense of humor that medical people tend to have. And I started trying to write it when I was in Virginia, and it just wasn't quite working for me. I mean, I had the setting in Virginia. That's where, I was working at the time. Some of the funniest people I ever met I worked with at hospitals in Virginia, but it just wasn't coming together right. And I wanted to try to work on that book again. So I kind of spent the better part of a year toying between writing another paranormal suspense book or writing this mystery book. And, my agent kept saying, so what are you doing? What do you got for me? And I said, I don't really know yet. And I kept saying, well, I've kind of got this, but I kind of got that, and I just don't know where I'm going with this. And then I decided, for reasons I'm not sure I can remember, to move from Virginia to Wisconsin. And then once I got to Wisconsin, I do have a sister who lives in Madison. That was a large part of the reason we moved to Wisconsin. Once I moved to Wisconsin, that medical book that I was trying to write, the medical humor one, started to work. I changed the setting to Wisconsin. The more I got to know Wisconsin, the better. And Wisconsin is just quirky enough and weird enough that it all worked. It all came together. And I thought, this is great. I love this book. I love it. And so I was just about to pitch it to my agent. And she said, you know what? I'm sick of this business. This is driving me nuts. I can't believe what HarperCollins did to you. She had another author. I won't name the author, but it was an author that began with this agent. And then this author became much bigger and promptly dumped this agent and went for a different one, and she was kind of hurt by that. So I think after that and what HarperCollins did to me and some other authors that she had, she just said, you know what, I'm retiring from this business. I don't want to do it anymore. So this is great. Now I have no publisher and no agent. I'm back to square one. So my great career that I thought was taken off has totally rolled into the ditch. So I kept working on that humorous mystery. And for a while, I was also doing book reviews for BarnesandNobles.com site, their online site. I got hooked up there with one of the other authors that I had learned or gotten to know online. And I was a very early online person using the Prodigy service. Probably nobody ever remembers Prodigy, but I was online in a writer's group on Prodigy, and some of the people that I met there I'm still good friends with today, and this was in 1992. It was before I sold my first book. Anyway, this other writer had hooked me up with a lady named Jamie at BarnesandNoble.com who was sending out books. You know, you'd get early copies of books to read and write reviews for them that they would then post on the BNN.com site. And they paid really well for it. Back then, they paid like $250 for a review, and I could crank out 5 or 6 of them a week, and it was great. I was like, great, I get to read books for a living. I can deal with this. And I was doing that when I moved to Wisconsin. And because I decided I was just giving up nursing altogether for a while. And unfortunately, about 2 years, I guess, after we moved to Wisconsin, BarnesandNoble.com decided to change the pay from $250 a review to $25 a review. And so I went looking for a nursing job. And it just so happens that the little town I live in of Stoughton has a hospital, a very good hospital, actually, a nice little hospital there, with an emergency department. And I had dabbled in ERs in the past. I had done a lot of different things, everything from birth to death. I worked OB, which was just horrible. My God. I don't know why anybody likes to do OB, and there's so many people, so many nurses who say, my dream job is OB. Sorry. But it was horrible. It was like the worst nursing job I ever had. Hospice I really loved. It was good. I spent a lot of years doing IV therapy. I was on an IV team, and I went around and just poked needles in people all day long. It was actually kind of fun. I got to meet a lot of people, I got to travel around the hospital. I wasn't taking care of a single patient for 12 hours. So if you get a really cranky, hard to take care of patient for 12 hours, that can be challenging. IV team, you just go in, you poke them, and you're on your way. I did run into a few issues. When I first moved to Virginia, I was working on the IV team there. I was actually heading the IV team there. And they talk about things a little differently in the South, below the Mason-Dixon line there. Some wordings are a little different. And I'd never lived below the Mason-Dixon line before. And so one day I came up to the room of a patient, a gentleman that we'd been taking care of he'd been in the hospital for a few weeks. And I had been off on vacation, and this was my first day back. And I came down the hall, and his wife was standing out in the hallway, and she was leaning against the wall. They were African-American couple. And I walked up to her, and I said, "Hey, how's Howard doing today?" And she said, "Oh, he's gone home." And I said, "He's going home? That's fantastic. That's great. That's wonderful." No, she said he's gone home, meaning he had died. He had passed away. So I'm out in the hallway cheerleading the fact that her husband has just passed away. So I learned, I learned the language a little bit when I moved to Virginia. They don't have phlegm in Virginia, they have phlegm, things like that. Now I lost my train of thought here. Let me see where I was going. Oh yeah, so sense of humor. I was working on trying to get that book written that had all the humor stuff in it that I wanted to get out there. Trying to see which slide I'm on here. Hold on just one second. And I used that book. I wrote it, I finished it, and I used it to try and find myself a new agent. So I went looking and hunting, and I finally found a new agent. I found a gentleman who I hired, or we agreed to work together. We contracted to work together. And he was not the quickest to respond to me. He told me he was submitting the book, but he would tell me that so-and-so rejected it, but he never showed me any actual rejection letters or rejection emails, because emails were becoming a pretty popular thing by then. And we played around and danced around for about 3 years, and during that time, he did manage to get the rights to my books from HarperCollins back reverted to me so that I could republish them if I wanted to, because they were out of print at that point. But that's all he accomplished. And so after 3 years, with much, much trepidation, I was the one who rejected this time, and I fired him. But it just scared me to death to be agentless once again, because I felt like that was sort of my security blanket and my little rope to future progress. So I went back on the looking for an agent again, and after several tries, I just got disgusted. And at that point, self-publishing was becoming something of a thing. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to self-publish this book. I'm going to put it out there. I decided to use a company that would let me get my rights back to the book if I got lucky enough to actually find someone who wanted to publish it later. And so in my delightful ignorance of self-publishing, I decided to go ahead and pull that trigger. I don't know, can you say that these days? Pull the trigger? Probably not. Anyway, I had a great title for this book. I loved this title. Everybody else hates it, but I loved this title. And I not only loved this title, I envisioned this as being a series, and I had all these wonderful punny titles for all the subsequent books. I had them mapped out. I had synopses written for them. I had this whole thing figured out. So I self-published The Vicarious Liver. Yes, so this was actually a very good title because I'm going to explain my theory here. It was about, well, it's actually Working Stiff is the first book in the Mattie Winston series. It did get published eventually, legitimately, but the main character is a nurse who goes to work for a coroner in a small town in Wisconsin. And the first case in this book, she ends up solving the case during an autopsy by observing something with the liver of a patient who's been killed. And it has to do with someone who's living a life that's not really their own. And so I thought, the vicarious liver, what a great pun. I love it. And I had a gut reaction. I had an eye for an eye. I had all these other anatomically associated titles and plots to go with them. I thought it was just brilliant. and everybody else hated them. I had that book out probably for 3 years, and during those 3 years, I think I made $300. I was super excited for the release of it. I thought, it's just going to be, I'm going to be famous right away. It's going to be instant success, you know, but that's pretty much where my self-published book was. And to this day, unfortunately, a lot of self-published books end up like that. It's just the sea of self-published books is getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year, because now it's much easier to do and everybody's doing it. And there's no way to really make your book stand out. And by the time I did this, it was in 2003 or 2004. And by then, I'd lost the audience that I had with my books that came out in 96, 97, and 98. You know, it'd been too many years, plus the last one nobody saw anyway because it had such dismal sales. So there really was no carryover to Beth Amos. At least in my world, there was no carryover. There was carryover in other worlds, though. We'll get into that in just a second. So since this book did so dismally, I got kind of disgusted and gave up on the idea of that. I did write during that time another suspense, kind of paranormal suspense novel, and tried to find another agent. I did find one for a little while that asked me to make some changes to it, and I would resubmit it, and she'd have me change it again, and I'd resubmit it. And after doing that 5 or 6 times, I said, you know, I don't even recognize my own book anymore. I don't think this is working, so I'm just going to move on. So by then, I was getting pretty good at firing agents. But I resigned myself to the fact that this just wasn't going to happen. The writing career, I'd had my moments, and that was as good as it was going to get, and thank God I had a nursing career. One day, out of the blue, the serendipitous part of this, after I was raising the white flag, I get this phone call from Jamie, the gal that I used to do the book reviews for at bnn.com. And she says, hey, I'm working as an agent now. Do you have anything? It's like, do I have anything? So she just took me on like that, and I sent her The Vicarious Liver, and I sent her my paranormal suspense book as well. She submitted both of them. The paranormal suspense book we never could get a bite on, but The Vicarious Liver we were able to sell to Kensington Publishing, and part of a 3-book contract. So they wanted to do a series, and I was more than happy to do it. They have insisted that we retitle it, of course. There was one problem, however. That book of mine from 1998 that HarperCollins had abandoned had dismal sales, and apparently bookstores have very long memories and very long histories that they can look into. And since Beth Amos had sold crappy in 1998, they weren't going to buy any more books from her. So they weren't going to put my name on the book. They wanted me to come up with a pseudonym. And I'm like, a pseudonym? Okay, well, let's think. At first I thought it was kind of fun. Let's think up a new name. That would be creative. So I took my middle name, which is Ann, and I took my son's first name, which is Ryan, and I said, all right, Ann Ryan. Then I sent that to my editor, and he said, okay, great. And then he got back to me about a day later and said, you know what, there's like a bazillion Ann Ryans out there. Can we make it a little more unique so it stands out? And I said, well, in German class in high school, my name was Annelise. You know how they give you a name in those language classes in high school? I said, how about Annelise Ryan? He goes, I like it. And so that problem was solved, and Annelise Ryan was born. All right. That's when my marketing struggles began, because I now had Annelise Ryan to market for, but most of the people in the world who knew me as Beth Amos. And some of them knew me as Beth Askew, and some of them knew me as Beth Springer, and some of them knew me as Beth Webb because, I was married a few times. But anyway, most of them knew me as Beth Amos because I just hung on to that name. I got tired of changing it back all the time, so I just hung on to that one. And it's like, how am I going to market this now? Do I have to create a website for Annelise Ryan? And then Facebook started to become popular, so I joined Facebook, and I had to create an author page for Annelise Ryan, but I already had a page of my own for my personal stuff, so I had those 2 pages to keep up with. And should I come up with a new website, or is bethamos.com still going to work, or should I have one that says AnneliseRyan.com? And then my editor suggested MattieWinston.com because that's the character's name, and that might make it easier for people to find it. And for a period of time, I had both, AnneliseRyan.com and MattieWinston.com. And I spent a great deal of time just trying to keep up with all of that stuff. The Mattie Winston series has done really well. It's a 12-book series at this point. The last book that came out last year was Dead Even. And during the time that I was writing these books with Kensington, around book number 4 or so, my editor said, you know, I've always had this idea for a book. I wanted to see a mystery that was set in a Cheers kind of setting, like a bar setting. And we could put like recipes for drinks in the back, because back then, still, I think, a lot of the mysteries were all including recipes for all baked goods and all kinds of dishes and how to keep your house neat and tips for that. There's all these little extras. So he thought it would be great to have this bar setting for a new mystery series. And I said, I could do that. And I thought about it for a while, and he wanted me to put together a synopsis. And I thought, I think I'll set this one in Milwaukee because it's a bigger city, and there's lots of bars there, and I used to be a cocktail waitress and a bartender, so I knew a little bit about the bar life and making drinks. And anyway, I put together a synopsis for him and said, I'm going to have this bar owner who's going to help solve crimes in Milwaukee, but just to make it interesting, I'm going to give her a little neurological disorder called synesthesia. And it was something that when I was writing Second Sight, that book way back in 1998 that was abandoned by HarperCollins, I was researching things about auras and other stuff, and I came across this weird neurological disorder called synesthesia, where your senses kind of get crosswired. So people with synesthesia may see something, but that sight also triggers a taste, or it may trigger a sound inside their head, or maybe they hear a sound, and that triggers a taste or a smell for them. So it's kind of like a cross-wiring of your senses. And I made my character have this disorder, and I made it worse than most. I kind of exaggerated it a little bit. And he loved the idea. And so a new series idea was born, but there was one little problem. At that point, we were at like book 4 or 5 of the Mattie Winston series, and they weren't sure yet how well that was going to go. It takes a few books for a series to catch on. So they didn't want to put Annelise Ryan on the cover, because Annelise Ryan, what happens if Mattie Winston tanks? Then your new series is also going to tank. However, what if this new series tanks and Mattie Winston is doing okay? Maybe tanking the new series will affect Mattie Winston. So we want you to come up with a new pseudonym. So, okay, Allyson K. Abbott was born. I put a little thinking into this one. First of all, I got strategic from a marketing standpoint. If you walk into a bookstore, you walk up to the mystery section, eye level, top shelf are all the A names. I knew that from being Beth Amos, because I was up there with that Andrews person, VC, who had the entire rest of the shelf and was dead at that point, but still writing. So I wanted to have that good marketing position, so I thought I'm going to have a last name that starts with an A, ABB even. Better. So Abbott, that's good. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to make this a little inside joke for me here. And so I came up with a first name that started with an A and threw that middle initial in there so that the initials were AKA, also known as. And I gave the name to my editor, and he immediately emailed me back, and he goes, very clever. And I love that about him. He caught on to it so fast. Nobody else did, but he did. Unfortunately, he left Kensington after a while, and I inherited a new editor, and then she left, and I inherited yet another editor. But in the meantime, the Mack's Bar series by Allyson K. Abbott went through 6 books. It was sort of a planned ending for the 6 books, which is nice. It didn't just disappear and drop off at the end. I think it's a great series. I really love the stories. They've been out now for, I don't know, it's been about 6 years, I guess, since the last one came out, or maybe 5 years. Anyway, they're really good books if you can still find them. They're very available in ebook. Some of the paper ones are hard to find. During all of this, though, of course, now I've got marketing challenges even worse, because now I have 2 pseudonyms plus my real name to try to keep track of, with websites and Facebook pages and Twitter accounts, and oh my God. And then I would have book signings where sometimes I was signing books for both authors, and I was like, I would just ask everybody, how do you want me to sign this? And I actually had different signatures. I made my A's different depending on who I was signing as, just to try to keep myself straight. Anyway, also during that time, my editor, my new editor, middle editor at Kensington, said, we'd like to see a spinoff series from Mattie Winston because it's doing so good. So I went ahead and created a character in one of the later books, I think in Dead of Winter, that became a spin-off character for her own series that ended up having 2 books come out. Excuse me. So I had a little bit of an identity crisis at this point because I really wasn't sure, who I was from one day to the next, who I was writing as, and I was trying to produce at least 2 books a year too, which was a little bit of a strain on me. And then I get a phone call one day from my agent, Jamie, and she said, "Hi, I'm going to quit agenting." She says, "Because I'm going to start writing my own books." And today she's actually a very successful women's fiction author. She's done very well for herself. But basically she quit. The good news was that one of her partners at the agency was going to take me on. So I didn't have to go hunting for a new agent. I sort of inherited one right away. And this new agent, Adam, has a very extensive history dealing with movies and TV options. He's all about the movie TV production kind of stuff, and spends a lot of time out in LA trying to negotiate things. And so he actually got a couple of movie interests in the Mattie Winston series that we got excited about, but then nothing happened, and that's pretty much the way most of those things go. But a lot of times they'll pay you money just for the right to be able to make something if they want to for like a year. You get what you call an option, and they'll say, "Hey, we'll pay you $1,000 if you let us just be the only people that can make something of this for the next year." And it's like, okay, fine. I don't have to write anything new. I don't have to do anything. They're just going to give me money. That's great. And I've learned not to tell people about those potential deals because they almost never happen. Well, for me, they never happen. However, there was a little bit of excitement because in 2019, we got interest from a production company that works a lot with Hallmark. And Hallmark has a lot of these mystery shows that they do that are based on other mystery novels, and they were interested in doing a Mattie Winston Mystery series. And so we were all excited. They had an actress tied to it. They had a scriptwriter tied to it. Everything was looking really good, and then COVID hit. So the production company went ahead and put everything on hold for the time being. Hallmark wasn't doing anything for a little while. The actress ended up moving on to something else. The scriptwriter never finished the script. The option expired, but they renewed it for a second year. It's like, we're still interested. We still think they want to do it. We're going to go ahead and renew that option. And then all of the management people at Hallmark did some shuffling. And the new people that came in didn't want to do it. So the Hallmark mystery thing fell apart. So that was a little bit of a disappointment because we came very close with that one, and I thought that was the one that was really going to happen. Book 11 in the Mattie Winston series came out, and typically they were doing a hardcover for me in one year, and then the following year when the next book would come out, they'd do a paperback of the previous one. And so book 11 had come out in hardcover, and then the following spring when book 12 came out, I was looking for the paperback online and I couldn't find it listed anywhere. And so I mentioned to my agent, I said, I don't see the paperback version for, I can't even remember now what the title is. That's terrible. But it's supposed to come out the same time as Dead Even. And he goes, well, let me call him and find out. And we found out that what was going on was that Kensington forgot to tell us that, hey, we're not going to do any more Mattie Winston books, and we're not going to issue these in paperback either. So, once again, I was without a publisher. Still had an agent, though, so I'm a little ahead of the game. And with COVID and everything, everybody's staying at home, so I had a year to just kind of do whatever I wanted. So I spent that year, I'm going to write something different. I'm going to branch out a little bit. And I had this great idea for a novel that was kind of in the same field as Gone Girl, that kind of a suspense novel. Spent a year writing it. I was super proud of it. I was very excited about it. I couldn't wait for my agent to read it. I sent it out to him knowing that he was going to love it, and that was his reaction to it. So at that point, I'm thinking, oh, geez, all right, my writing career is once again finished. I'm done. This is over. I just can't take it anymore. And at the same time, I had to also deal with my mother, who's never been an easy person to live with. As I mentioned before, she had a lot of mental health issues, and she proceeded to have a stroke and was living in Georgia at the time. And my other 3 sisters are all ostracized from her and would have nothing to do with her. And so I had to go down to Georgia, I had to bring her up to Wisconsin, go down to Georgia, sell her house, pack it all up, move it up here, find her an assisted living place. She's physically capable, but she has short-term memory loss and confusion. And so I was dealing with all of that and dealing with this rejection from my agent and how he hated my book that I just spent a whole year writing. And I was feeling pretty down. And my agent called me on the phone one day, and I was, talking to him and licking my wounds and saying, I spent a whole year writing this. How can you hate it? And we started brainstorming a little bit, and we came up with a really good idea for a book. I came up with a really good idea for a book. And I pitched it to him, and he said, I like the sound of that. He said, can you give me 50 pages and a synopsis for it? And I said, I'll see what I can do. So I banged that out in about 2 weeks and sent it to him. And he sent it to some editors at Berkeley. And they really liked it, but they wanted to do an interview with me on the phone. And I ended up having to do this interview with them in the middle of trying to pack up and move my mother's house in Georgia. At which point I also had to move, I had to get her cat, which was still in Georgia, and bring it up to Wisconsin and drive her car up here. I tried to medicate her cat before the trip, and the cat bit me in the hand. And this was the day before, the interview was the day before, so I was literally laying on a bed that had been torn apart, ready for the movers to come, trying to do this interview with these editors and sound all happy and excited about this new book that I was pitching. It must have gone okay, because Berkeley did contract for 2 books, and that's how we get to this, which, thank God, is written as Annelise Ryan, so I don't have to come up with a new pseudonym. They were happy to stick with Annelise Ryan. They actually liked the Mattie Winston books. So this is, cat bite story. Let me finish that cat bite story. By the time I drove all the way back up to Wisconsin, listening to the cat squall the entire time, never did get the pill down it. By the time I got up here, I had red streaks running up my arm, and so I went to the ER urgent care where I used to work. I have since retired from there, but they took one look at me, and it's like, yeah, we're admitting you to the hospital. So they admitted me upstairs just for some IV antibiotics. I had a private room to myself. I had a remote control TV. I had a phone where I could call and order my food with no diet restrictions, and they'd deliver it to my room. It was the most peaceful 24 hours I had had in months. I actually enjoyed my hospitalization, sadly. The next morning, the doctor came around and said, I think we can let you go home and switch you to oral antibiotics. And I was like, do you have to? Can I stay one more day? Anyway, so I finished writing this book because we were able to contract with just the 50 pages that I submitted to them. And it came out last week. It's been out now for 10 days, I think, 9 days, something like that. And the idea that I came up with was for a bookstore owner in Door County who's also a cryptozoologist. And for those of you who may not know, a cryptozoologist is somebody who hunts for cryptids, which are creatures rumored to exist but not proven so. So things like Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot. And her bookstore is not your ordinary everyday bookstore. It's called Odds and Ends because she sells mystery books, which is the ends, because somebody always dies in a mystery book. But the odds are the oddities that she and her parents, who are also cryptozoologists, have collected over the years. So she sells bizarre things in her store, skulls and insects, in lucite and, ancient tarot card decks and Ouija boards and things like that. And she has a mummified mascot that she keeps by the front door also. So it's not your typical store. I thought it was a pretty bizarre pitch, but hey, they liked it. So, and I'm working on the second book In fact, I'm almost done with the second book now, which will be taking place actually in Bayfield, Wisconsin, and will feature a Bigfoot. This one's got a Loch Ness Monster, in case you hadn't guessed from the cover. But so we're actually headed up to Bayfield when we leave here to do just a little last bit of research. So that's how I've gotten to where I am today. And my life these days is pretty much spent researching stuff that I'm pretty sure has me on a watch list or two. We actually had our garbage stolen a few years ago, so I'm pretty sure I'm on a watch list or two. I was walking at the dog park one day a couple of years ago, and underneath the trees, I saw this rounded white thing laying on the ground, and had a few dirt marks on it. And I got all excited because I thought it was a skull. I thought I'd found a body. It was actually a giant puffball mushroom. But I went home and I told my husband, I said, I think there's something wrong with me, because I got really excited thinking that I had just seen a skull. My mind continues making up stories. I tell a lot of my friends and family that I'm basically a vampire. If you hang around me long enough, I'm going to suck some of your character traits off of you and use them in my characters in my books. All the characters in my books are kind of Dr. Frankenstein creations, just bits and pieces that I take from people I meet and patients I've had and stories that I've encountered, and I use them to create the people in my books. So, in conclusion, that's what success has looked like for me. This is what success looks like for most people, but what it's really been like for me, obviously, is this little kind of hoodwinked, crisscrossed, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. And I'm hoping that I can continue to write until the day I die, and maybe even after that, who knows. And I do like paranormal stuff. I think that I'm very proud of this book. I think it's one of the best ones that I've written. I think that over the years I've honed my writing talents through all of the classes and books and practice sessions and rejections and things that I've done. So I hope people will enjoy it. It doesn't have quite the same level of humor in it that the Mattie Winston Mysteries do. The Mattie Winston Mysteries are quite funny, actually. If you enjoy a good laugh with your mysteries, then you should try some of those, because Mattie Winston is a very wry, very cynical, sometimes dark and twisted person, as most nurses that I know are, and doctors. Anybody that works in the medical field or EMS or police or fire, all those kind of emergency people tend to be that way. And I think I have a good sense of humor in general. I've kind of, again, that class clown practice and telling lies, I kind of honed that over the years. You learn to make people laugh. It helps you fit in a little bit better. So there is some humor in this one, but it's not quite as funny as the Mattie Winston books. It's a little more serious. And that's all I have to say. So, any questions? I tried. I tried to quit, and I just can't not write. I don't know. There's something about, it's just something. I actually sent my very first story out trying to get it published when I was 17, and I sent it to Highlights magazine. They rejected it very quickly, but that was the start of my career. So I've all through school, if we were assigned essay tests or book reports or anything that had to do with writing, I was like, yes, this I can do. I was good at math too, but I liked the writing part better. So it's just something I just can't not do it. I had a diary when I was very young, but I also had 3 sisters who were younger than me, and they learned how to pick the lock pretty quickly, and then they read it, and then they squealed on me, and so I quit doing that. So I've always been writing. I just don't know how to not write.
So are your books in this library?
That's a good question. There you go. That would have been embarrassing if they weren't. Any other questions? So, go ahead.
So it's 2022, and we talked about the saturation of self-published authors years ago. So some of us are still thinking being able to publish. Would that be the way to go still?
So self-publishing within the digital age has really taken on a life of its own. And there's all kinds of companies out there now that are sort of hybrid publishers where they actually contract with a writer to share the costs of developing the book and putting it out there. Some people are going that route. Some people completely self-publish. Amazon now, you can put your own book out there. I have 2 self-published books myself, actually. Those 2 books that I wrote in the past that never got published, I decided to self-publish them, and they're out there. They hardly ever sell. I think I made $2.90 in royalties last month on across from 4 books across all the platforms they're on. So 5 books, because I republished all of the HarperCollins ones too. The problem with self-publishing is that it costs a lot of money up front if you want to do it right. You really need to put in the money to have a much better cover than what I had on the Vicarious Liver. That cover was just hideously awful, but I was too stupid to know it at the time, and I have no artistic taste or talent in that kind of stuff at all. And you need to have the ability to write really well, and there's a lot of people out there who don't have the ability to write. They just want to see their name on a book. They want to see a book with their name on it, and they don't care how bad their writing is. They just want to publish it. And so they've all putting them out there now, and the market's just flooded with self-published books, some of which are quite good, most of which are god-awful. They're just frankly terrible. I mean, I've randomly sampled self-published books periodically. You can go into Amazon and do the read inside thing and read some of the stuff, and they have no concept of grammar. There's misspelled words, there's incomplete sentences, rambling sentences. I mean, it's just really, really horrible, bad stuff. And the problem is that the really good self-published writers there's no good way for them right now to rise above, to become the cream on top of the curds down below. I don't even know if that's how I'm in cheese country. I should know better than that, but there's just no way for them to get noticed. With traditional publishing going through like HarperCollins or Berkeley or Kensington, there's at least a gatekeeping system. There's editors, there's agents, and people who are screening these things. And so in theory, only the good stuff gets through. I mean, there's still dreck that gets traditionally published. I know there is, 50 Shades of Grey, but which actually was self-published, I think, first. But anyway, if you write porn, you can do anything. But if you're writing anything else, or soft porn, if you're writing anything else, you're probably going to have a struggle ahead of you with the self-publishing route. It's not easy the traditional route either. I mean, the industry is really struggling these days. It's struggling to figure out what it wants to be. When HarperCollins dropped me, that was when ebooks were really starting to become a thing, and that was one of the reasons why they decided to do away with their paperback division. The problem is that I never quite understood why they dumped all their own paperbacks and then bought Avon paperbacks. I wasn't sure what the logic of that was, but I didn't ask. And back then, a lot of the big New York publishers were kind of merging and buying up the littler companies, and a lot of stuff was happening. A lot of changes were occurring, and they still are. They're still going on. Right now, there's 5, major publishers in New York City. If you count Kensington, which is a family-owned smaller company, 6. But there's not a lot of companies out there to get traditionally published with. They all have their little subsets. So like Berkeley has Penguin, and they have, I can't think of what the other titles are now, but they have other imprints that they publish under. So it looks like a lot of publishers, but it's actually just one big company. With self-publishing, people don't have to wait as long to get their books out. I write a book, I turn it in, my editor reads it, and if they want changes, they send it back to me. Once it's approved by my main editor, it goes to a copy editor who then looks it over and fixes like all the commas that I put in that I wasn't supposed to. And if I have a continuity error somewhere, they try to catch that stuff. Then they send it back to me to read over their suggested changes and either approve or nix those. Then it goes into page production, and then you get, some months later, you get what they call galleys or page proofs, which is printed out pages that show what the actual book page will look like, and it's your last chance to go through and read and make any changes or corrections that you want to make. And then eventually the book comes out, but that process takes a year or more from the time that you finish writing the book. So you figure you write the book, and if that takes you 6 months to a year, you turn it in and it's another year before it comes out. And don't even get me started on how payment is made through the traditional publishers, because the way they pay their royalties out, you do get an advance, hopefully, an advance against royalties. So they pay you some money up front, but then you have to sell a certain number of copies in order to make back the money that they've already paid you before you ever see another cent. And they pay you for instance, I will get a check at around December 1st. I'll get a check from Kensington that will be for sales that happen during the first 6 months of this year. So there's like a 6-month lag time from when you sell the stuff to when you actually get the check. And on top of that, they hold a certain number of the books that they print and send out in what they call reserves, because bookstores basically still all operate on a consignment level. You know, the bookstores will buy books from the publisher, they'll put them on the shelves, they can keep them there for a month, for a year, for 3 years. If those books don't sell, they can send them back to the publisher for a full refund. So, yep. So if the publisher's paying me for books that they think have sold, and then, you know, a year later that book comes back to them and hasn't sold, they want to recoup their money. So they hold a certain number of the sales in reserves, and they kind of slowly let that money come out. So you get paid in these weird increments over long periods of time, and you never know how much you're going to get until you actually get the check. So it's kind of an awkward payment system. Self-publishing, you can put that book up there as soon as you want to. You can start collecting money right away, but it's probably not going to be a lot of money because nobody's going to buy your book. Nobody's going to know it's out there. They're not going to see it. It just takes a while to build up any kind of a platform. If you get a lot of good reviews, that can help you, but if nobody knows your book's out there and nobody reads it, how are you going to get the reviews? And a lot of the Publishers Weekly and those kind of places that do standard book reviews, they won't review self-published books. Kirkus will now review self-published books, but you have to pay to have them review it. So you're paying somebody to review your book. Am I going to trust the review from a company that's getting paid to write that review? They say that they'll be honest, and if they don't like the book, they'll say so, but I'm a little skeptical. So it's a very complicated industry, and there's just tons of books out there now. I mean, you can find a book on just about anything. I think that the fantasy and science fiction world tends to favor the self-publishing writers a little more than some of the other genres do. But that's just from what I've read online from other authors and stuff. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's a complicated industry. It's not as straightforward as nursing. You know, I can look at somebody, if they're blue, I know what to do. Any other questions?
Are there futures for books? I mean, will people still have books and like our great-grandchildren?
That's a good question. That's a good question. You know, when ebooks came out, people were saying that print books were going to die out. We weren't going to have many more. They were going to disappear. That hasn't happened, and actually print books are now becoming more popular. Most of the royalties that I get from my Mattie Winston books are on ebook sales, but that's primarily because the publishers quit printing them. It costs them money to print them. It costs them nothing to do the ebooks once they've paid the initial setup price, you know. But the good news about that is that I get a higher royalty on the ebooks, just because it doesn't cost them as much money to produce the books. So, you know, I don't think print books will ever disappear. They'll be around forever, and I think they're going to see a comeback. I hope so, because I love the look of them, the feel of them, the smell of them. To this day, every time I get my box of author copies of a book, it still doesn't get old 26 books into this to open that box up and see those books for the first time. And the first thing I do is take them out and smell them. Oh, I know. Yeah. 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 And they're not all buying Nooks. Yes, they all are. Well, except the HarperCollins books, because they're only available as ebooks, because they went out of print with Harper, and I reissued them, but only as ebooks, so because I self-published them. But yes, all the others are available on Audible. I confess that almost all of my reading these days is done on Audibles, because I spend pretty much every morning taking my dog and my grandpuppy to the dog park and walking a couple of miles, 3-4 miles every day, and listening to books. That's my primary reading time. So a really good, well done Audible book is quite entertaining. I really enjoy them. So, and I think they're all done very well, actually. I'm listening actually to this one myself right now. I just got A Death in Door County as an Audible, and I've been listening to it just to see how, because this is a new narrator for me. The Mattie Winston books were all done by the same person on the Audible books, so, but this is a new person, so I just wanted to see how she did it. She's doing a great job. It's also fun, though. I mean, it's frustrating, but it's fun. You know, most writers have. When Dean Koontz became famous, it was back in the 70s and 80s. It was a little easier for authors to hit it big then, because publishing was a different industry and it was only print books and people were buying books a lot. You know, the generations that are coming up are not book readers. They're digital. They're used to digital stuff. They want to see a screen, their phones, their computers, their tablets. You know, they're not used to the whole book thing. And so I think that's part of why the industry is shifting. But there's still some old souls out there that, you know, are reading the books. It's just a completely different world right now than it was when Dean Koontz hit it big. So. And if you're a dog lover, there's dogs, I think, in every one of my books. Any other questions? Great. Well, somebody was asking about books for sale. I did bring some of my author copies along because I had some I was going to give away to some folks up in Bayfield, but I can mail them books later. So if any of you want to purchase one of those books, then the money for the book will just be donated to the library. So I had my husband bring over a few from the hotel room. So if you're interested, we could do that. And then that's all I got. So thank you very much for coming tonight. I appreciate it. At least I didn't have a complete stand-up. Thanks. I have learned that when I do a book signing in a bookstore, the first thing I need to do is find out where the bathrooms are, because most of the people that come up to the table, that's what they want. They don't want your book. They want to know where the bathroom is. Little tricks of the trade.